What's going on, everybody? Today we are going to be looking at an engineer deck that I've been using, and it's been really effective for helping grind the ladder. Now, there are two things to note. First, I've got Harlequin. Second, I've got Dryad. These are two very, very strong cards altogether, but if you have those two cards using this deck, you'll be able to climb with ease. The only thing that I found to really stump me is Inquisitor. And, you know, that's just one of the strongest decks in the game. So there's not much you can do about that. But we've got Harlequin, which is an essential part of this deck. We've also got the Bombardier. This will be some crowd control. Also do a lot of damage to the boss. And more importantly, stun the boss. And then we've got Chemist. This will do a lot of armor destruction to allow my engineers to do more damage. Of course, the engineer is the focus of the deck. And Dryad, which will help me level up engineers without having to sacrifice, I guess, positioning. So, a few things to note here. I've done a lot of experimentation. I've tried Boreas, and I feel like Engineer comes slightly ahead than Boreas with the same deck. So, if I were to replace Boreas with Engineer, again, it's great. But I feel like Engineer comes slightly ahead. I've also done testing with Plague Doctor instead of the Chemist. I've also experimented with Cold Mage, which is pretty good too. But this overall is one of the best setups that I have found. Now, Plague Doctor you can run, but there's a few key things that will change. If you're running Plague Doctor, it helps a lot in the early game. But if you're looking for the long game, Chemist is definitely going to be the way to go. Plague Doctor dishes out a lot of damage, so the minions are going to spawn, they're going to die quickly, sending it over to your enemy. But you'll find that once you get later on in the match and the bosses come, it's not nearly as effective. So if you can rock Chemist, not panic, and just play the game for the long game, this is definitely the way to go. So we're going to jump in a match, and I'm going to show you how this all works. One thing I should mention, if you do not have Harlequin and you do have a Mime, go ahead and use that instead. It's kind of a budget Harlequin, not nearly as good, but it'll make it work. So we're dropping 4 cards off the back, and you'll see that I have a Dryad left on the field. That's because if I drop another Harlequin, I want to be able to use that on my Engineer. Luckily for me, I did just get one, so that's when I'm going to combine Dryad with a tier 1 Engineer. Again, pretty straightforward. The whole focus of this deck is getting Engineers. If you're unaware, Engineers deal more damage the more that are attached to each other. So if you look to the left side of the board, those 3, they're dealing more damage because those are connected. I also have 2 to the right side of the board, dealing some damage, but not nearly as much. But once you get a whole board connected, they deal significant damage. And once you have 6 Engineers connected, you'll see that they're going to turn into kind of a maniac Engineer, just like that. So they turn yellow, and that's even more damage. So I'm in a super good position right now. And I'm just going to be playing it safe. I'm going to be leveling up my Engineers with mana. The first level will cost 100. The second will cost 200. But it almost doubles the damage that's actually coming in. So right now my board is full of Engineers and 2 Bombardiers. I'm feeling confident right now. I just dropped a Chemist, so now my Engineers will be dealing more damage to all the monsters. However, my Chemist is only level 1, so the amount of attacks he's actually getting in will not be a lot. It's only going to make a significant amount of damage on the mini bosses and the Gorgon coming up, which you'll be able to see. So my Bombardier, you can see that it gets a stun early on, making sure that the Gorgon actually can't do anything. So my Engineers demolished it straight off the bat. And we're going to be able to do that pretty consistently. Eventually, you know, the bosses end up getting too much health, so you are going to take their first effect. But for the first couple of rounds with the right decks and the right Bombardier stuns, if you're lucky enough, you're not going to be taking any of their effects. So again, my whole board right now, all engineers. That is the point of the deck. That's what we're going to be going for. And the other thing you have to realize is your opponent's monsters and how far they're getting along, because there's going to be scenarios along the way where you have the opportunity to combine some of your cards, but at the same time it's not always worth the risk. Now chances are, considering I have Harlequin and Dryad, chances are statistically that I will get a card that helps me and deals more damage, but there is always that opportunity to get a Chemist or a Bombardier, and it can completely ruin my deck, especially if it ruins the connections for my engineers. Because again, every engineer you have connected to one another, the more damage comes out. So we're going to sit on this for a little bit. I'm feeling confident with the damage coming out. I'm just going to upgrade some of my cards. My engineers are max upgraded right now, so they are doing the max damage. And again, just keep an eye on your opponent's minions, where they are in the deck, and kind of figure out what you need to do. So again, you can see that with my engineers, the Bombardier, the stun that comes out, the Chemist armor destruction that happens, I'm able to kill the boss super quickly before it's even able to get its first special off, or whatever you might call it. So the next boss coming up is Tamer, and that is not one I have to worry about at all. Bedlam is a situation everyone has to worry about, but especially if you're an engineer deck, because that will completely change your cards. And if you're unlucky, like most of the time, it will ruin your engineer deck. It will scatter it. You'll probably end up with just Dryads and Harlequins and Chemists and absolutely zero engineers. So again, just doing some simple combining here, spawning cards when needed, and making the most out of my board, trying to get the most engineers available. Now you want to make sure you have at least one Chemist on the board, because again, that armor destruction is significant. It's going to do a lot of extra damage, or allow your engineers to do a lot of extra damage. And then your Bombardiers are also very important, but you want to make sure that your board's not overcrowded with Bombardiers. I'm feeling quite safe with the level 3 Bombardier, the level 2 Bombardier, and again, the level 1 Bombardier is okay. It's some extra insurance, but what I want from the Bombardiers are the stuns on the bosses to make sure they do not get their attack off. Again, the boss coming up is a Tamer. That's definitely one of the easier bosses, so it's not one I have to worry about, but I do take him out with ease. Unfortunately for my opponent, he had a lot of minions on the board. His Tamer is going to have a lot of health, so let's see what happens here. My opponent's definitely having some trouble here. He's got Plague Doctor down. He's got the procs on, but it's not doing too much. And this is an example of what I meant by late game, especially with the bosses. When you have Plague Doctors, if you can hold it out, it's not gonna do what you need it to do. Unfortunately for him, he was unable to clear it, but fortunately for me, we got the win. And there you go. That's a solid example of an engineer deck, a really strong deck. And again, it's gotten me a lot of trophies. The only thing that's really been able to clear it easily is Inquisitor, and that's a whole different story. But hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one. Take care.